Before cities, before roads, before kingdoms learned to rise and fall, there were rivers. The world did not begin with walls and thrones. It began with water moving across the land. Quiet, patient, unstoppable. And among those waters, there was one river the people learned to treat with special care, because it did more than flow. It answered. The river belonged to Oshun, Golden Oshun, the same goddess whose beauty could charm a king, the same goddess whose cleverness once ruined a rival. But here, beside the water, her power looked different. Here she was not whispering in palace halls. Here she was the river itself, moving through the earth, carrying sweetness into the soil. And wherever that water touched the land answered. Fields turned green. Fruit appeared where nothing had grown before. Animals gathered at the banks. Birds sang in the branches above the current. Children splashed in the shallows. Women who had waited years for a child began to feel life stirring within them. The river welcomed life, and life came. The people who lived beside the water understood something simple. You do not treat a river like ordinary water when it feeds your children. You honor it. Offerings began to appear along the banks. Honey, calabashes filled with food, golden cloth tied gently to tree branches, songs rising across the water at dusk. Because the people understood something the world often forgets. You do not take endlessly from a power that gives life. You thank it, you remember it, and you never assume the sweetness will remain forever. Because anything given can also be withheld. Oshun is gentle, but she is not passive. Sweetness is not weakness. It is power moving in a softer form, and like all power, it has a boundary. There was a season when the boundary was forgotten. A new king ruled the land, young, proud, certain that the world moved by his command alone. The elders still carried honey to the river, still sang the old songs beneath the trees. But the king laughed. The water flows because rain falls, he said, not because a goddess listens. And slowly the offering stopped. The songs stopped. The honey stopped touching the river. At first nothing changed. The water flowed as it always had. The fields remained green. The king felt justified. But rivers do not always answer immediately. The change came slowly. The current weakened. Not overnight, not in a way anyone could blame on a single cause, but week by week. The water that once reached a woman's waist barely touched her knees. The fish grew thin, then vanished. Birds that once gathered at dawn stopped coming to the banks. The grass along the river began to yellow. Mothers watched the water silently. No one spoke the fear aloud, but everyone felt it. The sweetness was leaving, and when the river withdraws, the land feels it immediately. The crops weakened, the fruit shriveled before ripening. Animals wandered farther and farther in search of water. Women who had prayed for children felt the old silence return to their bodies. Even the air felt different, dry, heavy, as if something generous had quietly stepped away. The river did not rage. It did not flood the villages in anger. It simply withdrew. And that was more frightening than any storm, because absence cannot be fought. The elders understood what had happened. The river had not failed. The goddess had turned her face. And the people returned, not with commands, with humility. Honey once again touched the surface of the water. Songs rose beneath the trees. Women knelt beside the current and whispered prayers into the flowing surface. One of them had come many times before, a young woman who had waited years for a child. She had stood beside the river when it was full, and she stood there now when it was barely moving. She placed her hands in the shallow water, closed her eyes, and spoke softly. "Ocean," she said, "Mother of the river, if I have forgotten you, forgive me. If we have forgotten you, forgive us. Return sweetness to this land. Return life." That night, she dreamed. In the dream, she stood inside the river itself, the water glowing softly around her, and in the middle of the current stood a woman, radiant, golden, calm, not speaking, only watching. The dream ended before a word was spoken, but when the woman woke, she knew. The river had heard. The change did not come like a storm. It came like a breath returning. A deepening of the water where it had grown pale. A darkening of the current where the river had thinned. Small fish appeared again in the shallows. Birds returned to the branches at dawn. The grass along the banks pushed green shoots through the soil, and one morning, as the woman returned to the river to gather water, she looked down into the current and saw her reflection clear for the first time in months. The river was back. The sweetness had returned. In time, the woman carried a child beside the same water where she had once prayed alone. That is how the people remembered, and that is why the river is still sacred. Even now, far from the earliest villages, people walk the forest path to the banks of the Oshun River. They come dressed in white. They carry offerings, honey, flowers, cloth. Songs rise again beneath the trees. Thousands gather where the water moves through the sacred grove. The priestess lowers offerings into the river. The surface ripples, and for a moment, the boundary between worlds feels thin. You can stand there and feel it. The same presence the first people felt when the river first made the land bloom. Still watching, still listening, still choosing whether sweetness will remain. Oshun is not only the river that gives life, she is also the river that can wait. The myths never ask us to pretend she is simple. She is the same goddess who once smiled at another woman's ruin, and she is the same goddess whose waters make fields green. The stories do not ask us to choose, they ask us to hold both. That is what makes her divine in the oldest sense. Not easy, not tidy, but real. And when you stand beside the water at dusk, watching the current carry sunlight across its surface, the old understanding returns. The understanding that sweetness is not weakness. Sweetness is what makes life possible. That is Oshun's true power. Not domination, not force, but the ability to make the world fertile, to make existence bloom, to make life worth continuing. That is why she is loved, and that is why she is feared. Because the river that gives life can also choose when life must wait. And when you stand beside the water at dusk, watching the current carry sunlight across its surface, it becomes very easy to understand why people still whisper her name. Oshun, the river that gives life.